Okay, wow. That was absolutely brutal. Oh, jeez, why was that so hard though? It's just a class 2 alarm and I had my sentry set up and everything. Like, why was... Oh. Ever feel like this is you in some situations? Yeah, me too. GTFO is a difficult game, and there's a lot to learn before you get to the point where you feel like you really know what you're doing. And being efficient with your tools is just one of the many skills you'll want to acquire on your road to mastering this game. So, how about I give you some simple tips and tricks on how to be better with the tool of your choice without taking up most of your day, and in exchange, you consider dropping a like on this video. Sound like a good trade? Awesome! Let's get right into it then. Hello everyone, Professor Scalar here, and welcome to my guide on how to be more efficient with each tool in GTFO. We're going to be keeping things simple while also informative by giving you 5 simple tips per tool. Although we won't be talking about each sentry individually, as the tips for them will apply to every single one of the sentries. To start things off, let's go over biotracker tip number 1, which is there is more to the biotracker than just simply tagging enemies. In GTFO, information is crucial, and currently the biotracker is the only informative tool in the game. You are literally walking around with a makeshift radar. You can see exactly how many enemies there are, how far away those enemies are from you, how close they are to each other, if those enemies are asleep or if they're awake, and so much more. And this information is crucial to share with your team both in and out of combat. If you're stealthing your way through a room and you stealth kill one enemy and an enemy across the room in a dark corner wakes up because of it, you are the first person to know. So it is your job to let your teammates know, hey, this enemy just woke up. That way your teammate can react to it and either kill that enemy before it screams, shoot the scout in the room, that way at least it's dead since there's no way they can stop the enemy from screaming, or just falling back out of the room, that way you can get to a safer place to hold out where you won't be surrounded by enemies. If you're dealing with waves of enemies coming after you during an alarm door or a reactor sequence or something, you know if you tagged every enemy in that wave. Sometimes people think that if an enemy isn't tagged, it doesn't exist, which yes, that is a problem on their part, and they sort of need to fix it themselves, but you can help alleviate that by letting them know, hey, there's a wave of about 20 enemies and I only pinged about 7 of them. Don't assume that there's nothing behind those tagged enemies. This is also incredibly important for when you're dealing with shadows, because if you're dealing with a wave of shadows and you tag them and the pings start disappearing or they kill off the ones that are pinged, but there are still some who aren't pinged, you need to let your team know. Call it out. Say, hey, there's a group of 4 shadows about 10 meters directly in front of us. That way your teammates know and they don't just assume nothing is there and they all start reloading their guns or look away. You are given so much information with the biotracker, and it is your job to share that information with your team when they need it. That way they don't learn it when it's already too late. Biotracker tip number 2 is don't tag enemies immediately every single time. See, if you're somebody like me, you are probably in the bad habit of tagging enemies the moment you hear the beeping from the biotracker. And if you do this, you usually only ping about 3 or 4 enemies in the wave of about 15 or 20. Which is pretty problematic, especially when dealing with shadow type enemies, because 1, most of the shadows aren't tagged, and 2, they're so far away that by the time those enemies get to you, the tags are going to vanish and you won't have any idea exactly where these enemies are, and you sort of have to just blindly open fire. So what I recommend you do, whether you're dealing with shadow type enemies or regular enemies, wait until they get within the 10-meter marker and then tag them. That way you get almost every single enemy in one go, and you can focus purely on shooting those enemies and supporting your teammates, instead of shooting for a little bit, swapping to the biotracker, giving callouts, and then tagging more, and then going back to shooting. Hold your trigger finger a little bit and practice some biotracker discipline. Biotracker tip number 3 is learn how to read and relay the biotracker's information. There's a whole lot more to the biotracker than just simply white dots and red dots. There's also a 10-meter marker and a 20-meter marker, which I feel like I don't see many people take advantage of. I don't know if it's just because I play with a lot of Americans, and over here in America, we prefer to use feet instead of meters, so we just don't really know what 7 meters look like or what the deal is, but it's good information to have. Would you rather have this call out? Hey, There are 5 enemies close to each other in the direction of 330, about 17 meters out, which is roughly right behind that counter across the room. Or would you rather have this call out? Hey, there's about 5 or so enemies. They're about almost 20 meters out in the northwest direction, somewhere on the other side of the room, so be careful if you go over there. I think it's safe to say most of us would prefer that first call out. And the thing is, if you don't know what 5, 10, 15, or 20 meters look like in GTFO, just drop down to a level with a sentry, because if you place down a sentry, a marker appears above it telling you how many meters it is away from you. So just drop it down, back up from it, and then use that to get a better understanding of what that looks like in-game. That way you can more accurately describe it to your teammates. Biotracker tip number 4 is a pretty simple one, which is become familiar with the cooldown of the biotracker. Once you tag an enemy, it takes roughly about 8.5 seconds until you're going to be able to tag more enemies with the bio. So what I recommend you do is just sort of count it out in your head. Become familiar with it, because while it won't happen too terribly often, there will be situations in the game where you're going to want to be tagging enemies as often as you possibly can. And instead of having to pull the biotracker out and guessing and think, oh, can I do it yet? Oh, nope, still got 4 seconds left. All right, put it back away, keep on shooting, pew, 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 pew. All right, now I can pull it out. Oh, nope, never mind, 2 seconds left. All right, put it away, pew, 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 pew. You know, anything silly like that. It's just a lot better to become familiar with it. That way it just becomes sort of like a twitch in your head, where once 8 seconds have transpired, you just instinctively know, hey, I can tag with the biotracker again, pull it out, tag enemies immediately, put it away, and go back to shooting and supporting the team. And finally, biotracker tip number 5. This one is more so directed towards biotracker mains, and it is, don't become overly reliant on the bio. What I mean by this is just don't get to the point where you're using the biotracker and you're not using your eyes and your ears whatsoever. I have seen myself fall into this hole before, and it's not a place you want to go. Because eventually you just get so used to having the biotracker in your hand everywhere you go, so you always know where every enemy is, and you never have to worry about actually running into an enemy you didn't see. But then once you take the biotracker away from us, we find ourselves freezing up over and over again because we don't even know how to traverse through a simple room without being afraid of accidentally waking something up. It is a bad place to find ourselves in. So while the biotracker is a really good informative tool, make sure you're using it because it's an informative tool and you want to bring that information to the rest of your team, and you're not using it because you don't know how to stealth properly and you need a crutch. If you do find yourself falling into that little category, might be a good idea to stop taking the biotracker for a while and get used to playing the game without it. That way you go back to using the biotracker for what it's actually meant to be used for. With the biotracker tips completed, let's move over to the mine deployer tips, starting off with tip number 1. One mine is almost always enough. If you're placing mines on doors to prepare for an alarm door you're about to do, or if you're about to open up a blood door and you want to place mines down, you don't need to go crazy and put on a fireworks show. You only need the one mine, because mines are incredibly powerful in this game and they can deal with a whole lot of enemies pretty easily. So just place the one well-placed mine on the door or the blood door and leave it be. Don't place down 2, 3, or even 4. The only times you really want to place down more than one mine is when you know for a fact most of the enemies that are about to come through that door are going to be the bigger enemies with more health. Things like giant strikers, giant shooters, hybrids, or giant chargers. In which case, yes, a second mine is perfectly fine and will help out quite a bit. Mine deployer tip number 2 is know when to use a parallel mine and when to use a perpendicular mine. A simple way to remember this is just look at the type of door you're about to mine. Is it a big, long door? If so, use a parallel mine like you typically would. But if it's a short, narrow door, use a perpendicular mine if you can get away with it. The reason for this is we want as many enemies as we can to be caught up in the mine's explosion. So if it's a big, long door, there's more surface area, so more enemies are capable of being pressed up against it at once. So more enemies get caught up by a parallel mine. But if it's a short, narrow door, there's less surface area, so not as many enemies can be pressed up against it. So a parallel mine, while it will deal with some of the ones in the front, will not deal with the ones in the back. But if there is something nearby that you can place a mine on to face almost directly towards that door, or at least slanted towards the door, then any enemy in the back will also be affected by the mine and taken care of. Just make sure though that if you're dealing a perpendicular mine, it's not too far away from the door, because we don't want damage fall off to occur and make it so that the mine is being less effective. Mine deployer tip number 3 is a pretty simple one, which is don't place mines randomly in the open for defense. See, mines can be incredibly powerful, but they can also be incredibly weak. When an enemy steps through that laser light of the mine, it's going off. It does not care how many enemies there are. There could be 1, 2, 3, or there could be 20. It's going to go off, and whatever is caught within the blast radius is going to be damaged by it. So if you place up against a door where multiple enemies can pile up because they have to spend time to break down the door, you can make the mine more effective as more enemies are going to be blowing up to it. But if you place it out in the open randomly, there's a good chance only 1 or 2 enemies are going to trip it and actually get damaged by that mine, and the rest of it that are a little bit behind those 2 unfortunate beings are just going to keep walking on as if nothing happened. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're placing a lot of mines randomly in the open in a level because there just aren't any doors you could take advantage of, might be a better idea to swap that mine deployer out for a sentry, since those work a bit better when used out in the open. Mine deployer tip number 4 is be quick with your mines to save a scuffed situation. Let's say you're in a room with a lot of enemies in it and you end up waking up the entire room. Or maybe you're in a room with multiple scouts and those scouts get triggered. It is sort of your job to salvage the situation since you have a very powerful tool with you. So if you're in a room with a lot of enemies and they wake up, make sure everybody on the team is on the same page and they all fall back together. Run out of that room and get to the nearest door that you can shut behind you once everybody's through, and then place a mine on it. That way most of the enemies that are coming after you will pile up on that door and get blown up by the mine. Or if you're in a room with a few enemies and some scouts and those scouts get triggered, you can let your 3 teammates work on the enemies that got alerted by the scouts, and you can quickly run back to a door that you know enemies are going to take to get into your room to get to you, and just shut it and mine it. That way the scout wave will get blown up mostly by that mine. This makes it so that your team does not have to lose nearly as much health in these situations or spend nearly as much ammunition. So make sure you have a good understanding of map layouts and just sort of how enemies path. That way you can be quick to salvage a bad situation with one super effective mine. And finally, tip number 5, which sort of coincides with tip number 4, learn the map and which doors in the level are expendable and which ones are crucial. Let's say you find yourself in a situation where you're in a room and there are about maybe 7 giant strikers and about 20 regular enemies, and you accidentally wake everything up. You fall back to a door, you shut it behind you, you mine it, you C-foam it a little bit, and you just let most of the enemies pile up on the door breaks open, the mine blows up, and almost everything is dead. Congratulations, you just made that instance a little bit easier to deal with. But then you learn that that door you just broke down is incredibly important for the upcoming alarm door, and now that it's gone, any enemy that spawns from that direction doesn't have a single thing that's going to stop them from getting into your room. You might have made that one situation a bit easier to handle, but you've made an upcoming alarm door that's a lot more difficult, even more difficult now. You need to know which doors in the map you can actually use and sacrifice for a mine play, and which ones you can't. Because if you don't, then you might make a mistake that is going to cost your team a whole lot in the upcoming future. Moving on to the C-foam launcher tips, we have tip number 1, which is doors are not the only place you can effectively use C-foam. That is definitely the primary focus a lot of people go to, just C-foaming a door and mining it. That way more enemies pile up on it before it breaks down, and it takes them a whole lot longer to get into the room. But there's multiple different ways you can use C-foam effectively. Let's say you find yourself in a situation, you're in a room, there's a lot of very powerful enemies in here, you have very few resources, and you just can't afford to wake it up. And all you need is to go in and grab a key card and get out. But that key card is in a box with a padlock on it that's right next to 2 sleeping giants. Nobody on your team has lock melters, and you have no idea if there are any lock melters throughout the rest of the level. Instead of spending multiple, maybe 10, 20 or so minutes going back and trying to find those lock melters, you could just simply C-foam those 2 giant strikers, smack the padlock off, grab the key card, and walk away. Because even though smacking the padlock would originally wake them up, if they are C-foamed, it won't, because the only thing that alerts a C-foamed enemy once it breaks out of the C-foam is if you actually damage it. If an enemy nearby screams, or if you just literally walk into it and then walk away from it, it won't care. So you could just do that to get the key card and get out safely. Or another situation, let's say you're setting up for an alarm door and you realize that a crucial door broke open, and because of it, every single enemy is going to guaranteed go through that broken door right into your room, and they won't take another route. Well, you don't have to worry about C-foaming and mining any of the other doors, so why don't we spend some of that C-foam on the floor? That way when enemies do come through, they get frozen and placed by it, you can shoot them and kill them, or you can place on a sentry or 2, that way it also shoots the C-foamed enemies, and you can focus more so on dealing with the scans and less so on trying to kill off these enemies coming in. There are many different effective ways you can use C-foam, it just comes down to you and your team and how creative you want to be. Just make sure that you're actually being creative and using it effectively, and not delirious and spraying it all over the floor and saying, hey, it's fine, the enemies will step in it, it's protective C-foam, we're good, and then that C-foam never gets used whatsoever. C-foam launcher tip number 2 is the fact that you don't need a 100% charge to fully reinforce a door. You actually only need roughly an 80% charge from the launcher to do this. So instead of just doing a 100% charge every single time, try to aim for a 70 to 75% charge, and if it doesn't fully reinforce the door, just spray one glob at a time until it does. Because in doing so, you're saving roughly about 20% tool refill per door, which is insane if you think about it. If you were going to look at it mathematically, this is literally a Seafoam 5 doors, get one for free type of deal, which is beautiful. So if you really want to be efficient at seafoaming doors, stop going for 100% charges and start practicing 75% charges, because once you do it enough, you'll get so used to it that you'll be able to perfectly seafoam every single door every single time. Seafoam launcher tip number 3 is something that I'm pretty sure many people are aware of, but for those of you who don't know, you can refoam doors. Once you apply seafoam to a door, that's not a one and done deal. As enemies are hitting it, they're slowly chipping away at all that seafoam. But if you reapply it, you're just undoing the work that they're doing. You're undoing their undoing of your initial work, I guess. So you could keep reapplying it. But just like I said in tip number 2, you don't want to just keep on doing 100% charges over and over and over again. Rather, you want to spam fire one glob as fast as you can. You can't just simply spam click in order to make this work. You are going to have to hold it down for about half a second so it actually charges and then releases. And then there's a little bit of a delay before you get to do the next one. But if you get good at this, you can keep re-seafoaming a door over and over and over again as long as you still have ammunition in the launcher, and you don't have to worry about wasting that approximate 20% that you normally would by just doing a full charge over and over again. The other thing too is if you're refoaming a door, you don't have to just keep refoaming until every single scan is done. If you're doing something like a class 5 alarm door, keep on re-seafoaming the door until it gets to the 5th set scans. And then once the 5th set scans come out, your teammates can let you know and you can stop seafoaming the door and go help them finish them. Because enemies still have to break all that seafoam off the door and then break the door itself. And by the time they do that, you will most likely have finished that final set of scans, which can preserve even more seafoam and make it so you have more for it later, being even more efficient than you normally would be. Seafoam launcher tip number 4 is learn the difference between the seafoam launcher, the seafoam grenades, and the seafoam trip mines, because even though these are all seafoam products, they are a bit different from each other. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses. For example, the seafoam launcher, its primary strength is the fact that you can control how much you shoot out of it. You don't have to do a 100% charge every single time. So if you're trying to seafoam all across the floor or slowly reapply seafoam to a door or seafoam weaker enemies, the launcher is going to be better than the grenade and the trip mine, because once those activate, it shoots out all of the seafoam. There is no halfway with the seafoam grenade or trip mine, it's just all 100% immediately. If you're trying to seafoam a door very quickly or more powerful enemies like the Birther though, the grenade is going to be better than the launcher, because as soon as the grenade hits a door, it instantly applies it to the door and reinforces it. Or if you're trying to seafoam a Birther, one grenade will encase her in seafoam, but one fully charged shot from the seafoam launcher will not encase a Birther. If you're trying to deal with her while she's awake, well, good luck trying to actually get her with the launcher, because she's going to be running around a lot. Yes, it's going to be a bit difficult to hit an awakened Birther with a grenade, but at the same time, you can just wait until she stops the scream and then you can immediately hit her. So it's a lot more effective to use a grenade against a Birther. But what about the seafoam trip mine? Well, let's say you're trying to seafoam a long corridor. The trip mine has so much more seafoam in it than the grenade or the launcher do, so it's going to be a lot more effective. Just place it on a wall and shoot it, and it'll spray it all throughout the corridor. Or you can position it in a way where it's facing towards a door, so if you need to emergency seafoam a door, you can shoot the trip mine and it'll shoot it out and encase that door, as well as get a bit on the floor that can encase enemies after they break in. Or, let's say you want to deal with some of the most powerful enemies in the game, the Queen Birther or the tank. A seafoam launcher and a seafoam grenade are not going to be able to deal with them effectively, as it's going to take, I think, 3 full charges from the launcher to get the tank or the Queen Birther, and it's going to take 2 grenades to get either one of them. But one seafoam trip mine is enough to freeze a tank or Queen Birther right in its tracks, as well as spray a little bit extra on the floor that can be used to seafoam anything else that might be nearby. So depending on what you're dealing with or what type of situation you find yourself in, you're going to want to consider which one of these 3 seafoam products you should actually use, because some are going to be better than others. And last but not least, we have seafoam launcher tip number 5, which is learn how to not accidentally waste your foam. Let's say you're preparing for an alarm door and there are 4 different doors that enemies could take to get into your room. The odds of that is probably pretty small depending on the length of that alarm door. In most cases, maybe 2 or only 3 of those doors are going to get broken open. So instead of placing mines and seafoam on all 4 of the doors, you can mine all 4 of them since you can actually pick the mines back up afterwards if they don't get triggered, and then you could do partial foaming on all 4 of those. Maybe just do a 25 to 50% charge per. That way you could do the full team scan that began or at the start of the alarm door, and then quickly run over to those doors, see which ones are actually about to get hit, and then you can quickly refoam those up all the way. And if you want to, you could stay over there and just keep on reapplying foam over and over and over again, or you could go back and help your teammates finish the last few sets of scans. This is a very situational type of thing because obviously it depends on the alarm door, since some alarms have nothing but full team scan, so you might not be able to go over to the doors. Maybe depending on the layout of the room, you might not be able to make it to the doors because they're way too far away. Maybe you know for a fact that you're actually able to funnel them down one door if you just simply leave it open, in which case you could just use sentries and not foam whatsoever. There are many different things that could change this up, so it's a really good thing to just learn how the alarm is going to work, what route enemy is going to take, what the higher chance or which door has a higher chance to get broken open, and then just work off the fly. That way you're not just fully seafoaming 4 doors, finishing the alarm, and seeing only one of those doors got broken down, and you just wasted about 60% seafoam. And to end things off, we have the Sentry tips. Starting off with Sentry tip number 1, which is consider which Sentry is the best for the level that you're about to play. Throughout the history of GTFO, we've had multiple different types of sentries. We've had the Auto Sentry, the Burst Sentry, the Sniper Sentry, and the Shotgun Sentry. And by the time you watch this video, there might have been a new sentry added into the game that I'm unaware of. And each of these sentries have had their own pros and cons. When you look at them, there are multiple things you should consider. How much damage do they do per bullet? How many bullets do they fire per second? What is their effective range? Is it a close range sentry? Is it a mid range or a long range sentry? How long does it take to actually shoot each individual bullet? Does it have any special effects like high stagger capabilities or piercing capabilities? Many different things you should consider when looking at a sentry. And once you have a better idea of how each type of sentry works, you can then have a better idea of when you should be bringing them in. So then when you play a level for the first time and you scout it out and you look at the type of enemies you're dealing with and just the type of situations you're put into, you can get a better idea of which sentry or sentries you should bring into the level with you to make things easier. There's really no easy or simple way to say this is the best sentry for this level, you should always take it, so you need to do a lot of experimenting with it and get a good understanding of how that sentry works. That way you can be more confident in your selection. Sentry tip number 2 goes along with number 1, learn the effective positioning for that sentry. You might bring the best sentry for the job into the level with you, but if you don't know how to position it properly, it's not going to put in that much work. For example, the Auto Sentry. It is a very high rate of fire, high stagger sentry that sucks at long range combat. If you try to force it to work at long range combat, most of the shots are going to miss and it's just going to waste a lot of ammunition. So instead of placing it out in the open where it can just shoot at enemies from 30, 40, 50 meters away, maybe slant it a bit towards you so it only shoots enemies as it passes by it. Or maybe position it closer to where enemies are coming from, that way it'll be shooting them as they come into the room, and then you can shoot at those staggered enemies with weapons like the DMR, the Hell Gun, the Hell Revolver, or whatever long-range weapon that you have in your active rundown. So make sure you're positioning your sentry in a location where it's actually taking advantage of its strengths and it's not just going to be missing most of its shots or just not shooting pretty much at all because it doesn't have enough time to shoot at enemies before it gets out of its line of fire. Sentry tip number 3 is the fact that sentries do not shoot at shadow type enemies if they are not tagged with a biotracker, which can both be a curse and a blessing actually. The curse factor is just you have to reposition your sentry if you're going to be dealing with a alarm door that spawns in shadows. Because obviously if you place that sentry way too far away from you, by the time you tag those shadows with the biotracker, they've walked right past the sentry and it's not going to put in any work. So you do need to recalculate a little bit there. When it comes to the blessing factor though, you can actually use the light of the sentry to make it easier to see a shadow silhouette. If you're somebody who has a very difficult time seeing them without having a high powered light, but you don't want to actually risk waking them up by shining a light on them, you could just simply plop your sentry down, and as long as there are no regular enemies in the room as well that the sentry can target, it will just keep on shining that light to the left and to the right a bit, and that high powered light actually can make it easier to see the silhouette of the shadow. So if you know there's a shadow somewhere in front of you, just place down the sentry, see if you can spot the silhouette, and if not, walk forward a little bit slowly, place it down again, and just keep using it. That way you don't have to just hug the biotracker person the entire time, and you can go off on your own and actually have a bit of an easier time dealing with shadows. It's not the best method for dealing with them, but it definitely can help out in some situations. Sentry tip number 4 is don't just drop your sentry when things go wrong. Because when you drop your sentry down, when you wake up a big room with a lot of enemies, or maybe you woke up a scout or two, you're basically saying to the rest of your team, this is where we're going to hold out, this is our final stand position, and that's not a good thing. Because in most situations, you are not in the best holding out position. It would be a lot safer to fall back to a position where you are safer, or just simply use mines and doors and just let that deal with most of the enemies. Because the thing that gets people killed a lot in this game is trying to hold down a location where they can get surrounded by enemies. Because once you get surrounded by enemies, you start getting licked to left and right, people start to panic and start shooting in random directions, and things just go downhill. So if things go wrong, hold on to your sentries. Fall back to a position where enemies can only really come from one direction at you, and then if you want to, you can then plop them down. But even then, I would say try to hold off a little bit on it, because if you could just mine a door and just let that deal with most of the enemies, it's a whole lot more effective than placing down multiple sentries and having them pretty much shoot at the exact same enemies and wasting ammunition. So try to break the habit of just dropping your sentry whenever something goes wrong. And finally, to end things off, we have sentry tip number 5, which is don't place sentries outside of closed doors if you have a mine on the inside. I've seen so many people make this mistake, and simply put, it's just a waste of your sentry's ammunition. It literally does you no good 99% of the time. It does not delay the rate at which the door is broken down, because it doesn't matter if there's one enemy, 5, 10, 16, or however many enemies out there, that door is going to break down just as fast as it normally would. And any enemy that gets killed off by that sentry most likely would have died to the mine once the door breaks open and the mine explodes. So any enemy you kill with that sentry out there is literally just a waste of resources. So please, for the love of Ludwig himself, do not place a sentry on the outside of a closed door. It is a complete waste of resources. Save it later and use it in situations where you cannot take advantage of mines and sea foam and you actually need your sentries because you're fighting out in the open. It will save you and your team a whole lot of grief. And with that, I have gone over every tip I wanted to share with you all in this video. Thank you to every one of you who watched this video all the way through to the end. If you have any questions for me in regards to anything I talked about in today's video, or anything GTFO related, or you just have something in general that you want to say, please do leave it down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, then consider hitting that like button. It helps out the channel and it helps these videos get noticed by people who might be interested in them. And while you're down there, you might as well hit that subscribe button and ring that bell to get notified whenever I post a new video. I also have my own Discord server, so if you want to go the extra mile and put a smile on my face, go down to the description and hop right on in. There'll be a link down there that'll take you straight to it. It's always nice to see new, fresh faces in that Discord. Also down in the description, you can find a link that'll take you to the official GTFO merch store. So if you love this game and want to pick up some sweet looking merch, go take a look and see what they've got. Until next time, everyone, we'll have to just continue on waiting for R6 extension. Thankfully, it's not too far away from us, so just a little bit longer we'll have to wait. And I'll see you all in the next video.